Engines roared through the black void like thunder rolling across an empty sea. In the observation dome of the Concorde station, glass hummed with the press of docking clamps. Lights stuttered along the ring, amber to red to white, the way a heartbeat stutters when it sees a shadow it knows is real. Around the station, fleets idled with weapons cold and safeties locked because a treaty demanded restraint in the presence of a single arriving ship. It was not a large ship. It was a spear, sleek, old, etched with glyphs that swallowed starlight and bled it back as a faint, oil-slick sheen. Every sentient within 100 light-years knew the name, the Oathless Thorn. It had crossed 1,000 war fronts, ended dynasties, raised flotillas, and left behind centers of power turned into quiet ash. It had one crew. It needed no more. The ancient warrior descended alone. He stepped through the docking gate without ceremony, a towering shape draped in layered plates like fossilized scales. His skin, where it showed between pieces of armor, was the deep gray of basalt. His eyes were unlit coals. He wore on his back a weapon that looked too heavy to lift, an angular blade stitched with blue conduits that pulsed with a patient charge. Every species present on the concourse recoiled. Security rings tightened. The translators whispered across the air, Verkadish, honor killer, last of the Thorn-born, the one who never refused a challenge. He did not raise his weapon. He only looked up into the dome. He looked at the fleets. He looked at the council flags that hung like prayer cloths over a stage nobody wanted to stand on. When he spoke, the station's speakers crackled and the very metal around them seemed to hold its breath. "I am Verkadish," he said. "I have come to answer the new claim of dominion over Sector 9. There will be a duel, with terms as dictated by the ancient binding. Who answers for humanity now that you lay claim to the corridor?" 100 diplomats tried to go deaf at once, because to answer was to enter the circle. To enter the circle with the Oathless was to die. In the gallery above the concourse, a human officer stood very still. She was not tall, not impressive. The name tag on her jacket read, LT Mara Salas, Linguistics/Systems. She had been sent by the Third Fleet as a translator and code holder, a person who could hear old words and make them clear. Her hair was bound back with a cord pulled tight. On her left wrist was the thin scar of a childhood fall that had never fully faded. She did not move, but her mind moved. She felt the gravity in the dome shift as heads turned to the human delegation. She saw Admiral Wraith Barlow's jaw clench. She saw fear. She felt a flare of anger that fear had moved into this place like a thief and refused to leave. Mara had learned the stories of Verkadish from the archives. She knew the cadence of his cycles. The rituals honored not because they were just, but because they were old, and the old had become an iron law. A civilization would claim a corridor. Another would contest. The Oathless would arrive to answer on behalf of the old pack's tangled ghost. The duel would happen on a ground designed by tradition to favor death. The challenger would fall. The Oathless would depart. The corridor would become quiet again under someone else's flag. And no war, the old binding would say, just one more body. Around her the whispers gathered like storm foam. Let another species answer. Let the council annul. Let the old laws shift. Let someone else bleed. But the treaty that held 100 knives in 100 sheaths was clear, and so was the old fear. Verkadish did not recognize the council. He recognized the ancient binding and the courage of whoever stepped into the circle. Mara Salas felt her heart strike once, twice, and then settle into a strange stillness. She had been raised in a mining dome on Ceres, where the air had a taste of aluminum, and the stars were breath-stopping cold. Her mother had taught her to listen, and to speak when the right word could change the vector of a day. She walked down from the gallery. When she reached the edge of the concourse, security moved to stop her. Admiral Barlow's voice clipped into her ear. "Lieutenant Salas, stand down." She kept walking. She stepped into the ring of light that the station's projectors had cast out of habit because ritual likes a stage. She lifted her chin and let her voice carry. "I am human," Mara said, in the old trade tongue so every ear heard it first in the language that had borne too much. "I answer." The air in the concourse thinned as if a door had opened into hard vacuum. Verkadish's head cocked a fraction, his gaze fixed on her. He studied her hands empty. He studied the curve of her jaw, the light in her eyes, the way her boots planted as if she meant to stand there forever. "A translator," he said like percussion under earth. "You are not a warrior." "I am human," Mara repeated, because some words are their own strength. "I give my name with witnesses." Verkadish stared at her for a long, unbroken 20 seconds while ships hummed and banners hung and thousands of hearts made difficult calculations. Then he nodded once, as if acknowledging a wind that had chosen its own path. "Terms," he said. "The ancient binding allows the challenger to choose the ground," Mara said softly. "And the means, I choose the interstice." A tremor ran through the concourse. The interstice was not a battlefield. It was a place between, a corridor where the station's shield lattice touched the edge of a micro-folded extra-dimensional seam, where mass bent like a reed in water, where the rules of distance thinned. It was used by crews to run cables and patch grid relays. It was stable enough to walk through for exactly 8 minutes at a time before the lattice reset. It was not a place to swing a blade. It was a place where sound carried strange and sometimes did not carry at all. "The interstice would deny me my weapon," Verkadish said, with something that might have been amusement if time had not burned the shape out of it long ago. "It will deny me mine as well," Mara said. "What weapon do you carry?" Mara opened a hand. On her palm lay a slender rod, smooth matte, no larger than a stylus. "A memory probe," she said. "It records, it plays back. It shines light into places your pact left in shadow." A low current of murmurs rolled through the gathered, a tide of confusion and contempt. Verkadish's expression did not change. "You would duel me with light," he said. "With witness," Mara said. "The old pact said one dies so many do not, but it never required the duel to be blind." Verkadish's eyes cooled by a degree. "If I refuse your ground, then you acknowledge fear," Mara said, softly, sharply, each word placed like a stepping stone she had to cross without falling. "And in doing so, you break your own oath to answer." Silence spread. He did not blink. Then slowly he smiled. "Your species trades in audacity," he said. "Very well, the interstice. 8 minutes inside, we leave all weapons behind save your light." He reached up, unfastened his blade. The clamps disengaged with a hiss. He laid the weapon very gently on the deck as one lays a child to rest. Security officers exhaled the way men exhale when a storm goes in a direction that is predictable. Mara set her probe on the deck beside his blade just for a second and looked at it without touching it, as if to show she respected the space as well. Then she picked it up and tucked it into the cuff of her sleeve. The two of them walked toward the access hatch. The crowd parted, not so much to allow them through as to get out of the way of something happening that felt like the moment a planet shifts its orbit by a fraction of a degree. They entered the interstice. The sound changed first. The hum of the station's heart slowed like a long breath pulled through a reed. The light changed second, shimmering along the struts and cables, bending around them in delicate waves. Gravity felt like a suggestion. The floor chose to hold them, but not without the polite reminder that it didn't have to. The corridor was narrow, scarcely 2 bodies wide, and lined with diamond lattice patterns that caught the light and let it go. They walked, human and legend, side by side without touching. 8 minutes, 2 people, no weapons except memory. "What do you believe I am?" Verkadish asked, as if they had met in a garden and not in a throat between dimensions. "A man who does not know the names of the people he has killed," Mara said. "Clear, not cruel, just true." "I have known many names," Verkadish said. "I have eaten their ash and carried their banners in my throat, and I have laid their skies to sleep. The law I serve requires hunger, and I have fed it well. The corridors are quiet because I keep them quiet. The corridors are quiet because terror makes a good muzzle, Mara said. But quiet is not peace. He glanced sidelong. You would instruct me. I would remember with you, Mara said. She reached into her sleeve and brought out the rod. It hummed against her skin. If you are willing to look. 8 minutes, he said. Mara stopped. The corridor thrummed. She pressed the probe to a lattice panel. It drank in data like a root. She lifted it and set it against the arch of Verkadish's armored shoulder. This will not harm you, she said. He did not move. The probe glowed soft. Sound poured into the air. Voices layered into voices. The first was the voice of a child. It asked a question about why the stars sometimes fell. The second was the voice of a commodore who ordered her fleet to hold because honor had been named. The third was the voice of a man who did not scream because he had sworn he would not. The fourth voice had no words at all, just a low chant for bravery that he used to keep his hands from shaking. Verkadish looked at the air as if an animal had grown flowers. This is not the duel, he said, but his voice had altered by half a tone. No, Mara said, this is a doorway. She moved and pressed the probe to another lattice seam, a place where the station kept old energy, where the memory of past duels had imprinted like frost. The voices changed. They were smaller. They were domestic. A sister telling her brother to sleep. A shopkeeper tallying the day in a tongue that had died 3 centuries ago. A song sung bad and joyful in a mess hall on a broken freighter. The hum of tea poured. Ordinary weight. Ordinary grace. The duel, Verkadish said again, as if reminding himself he had a purpose. We have 8 minutes, Mara said. When we walk out, you can raise your blade again. You can do what you have always done, but now you cannot say you did it without seeing. You will have to carry me with you, and I will have to carry you. He looked at her. In the interstice light, his eyes finally showed a spark. What do you carry, human? Mara touched the rod to her own chest. The air filled with a sound like old laughter and a tiny chorus of metal pans clattering. A kitchen in a mining dome, a warm hand turning her face up. A voice that said gently, Mara, you listen with your whole body, that is your gift. Then the sound shifted. Sirens, the tight wheeze of a torn suit. A memorial service where nobody cried until they were alone because on Ceres tears froze quick and were a waste of water and you did not waste anything in the dark. I carry the ones I could not save, she said, and the ones I can. Something rippled in the corridor behind them. Mara's head snapped around. The lattice flickered, then firmed. She felt the time tick in her bones. 3 minutes left, maybe less. The interstice wasn't a clock. It was a lung. Someone will fight you for this choice, Verkadish murmured. Not me. It doesn't matter what someone will do, Mara said softly. We are here now. He nodded almost respectfully and reached with 2 fingers to touch the rod. He did not take it, he just let his massive hand hover near. The sound that answered was not a voice. It was a wind through ruins. It was a dry chorus of ordnance whispered to sleep. It was the stamp of a boot on the day he had left his kindred, carrying an oath like a brand under his skin because someone had to carry the old fire and it had fallen to him. And when it fell to you, you did not complain. You did not bend. Mara's breath burned a little in her throat. She touched the rod to the lattice again, faster now, images rising like spray. The Oathless carving his way into a flagship and standing in its heart while men and women fired at him until they had nothing left to fire, and then they stood anyway. Verkadish at the center of a coliseum on a dust world with 2 suns, watching yet another brave idiot walk toward him and not looking away when he fell. The silence after the kill, always the same shape, always the same weight, a silence so practiced it had become a ritual of its own. The lattice trembled, the corridor stuttered. The interstice drew a long breath and let it go. They were out. They stepped back into the concourse. Sound rushed in like a tide. The crowd had not breathed for 8 minutes and suddenly remembered how. Verkadish slowed just barely, as if coming out of cold water. Mara lifted the rod for all to see. "I have taken witness," she said. "We have shared what was hidden. The duel is not over, but it is changed. I ask a second term, not for myself, for the ones who stand watching." Verkadish's head tilted. "Speak." "Let me face you," Mara said. "Here, before the council, before our fleets, but if I do, you must face the names you carry. All of them, we will call them, we will not turn our faces. And if I fall knowing you see me. And if I do not, you walk away and you lay your blade down and you stop. Verkadish, you stop." The concourse turned to ice. Admiral Barlow's voice smashed into Mara's ear. "Lieutenant, stand down now." "Admiral," she said quietly, "please." He cut off not because he agreed, but because he recognized too late that he had missed the moment earlier when the vector changed, and now the only way was forward. Verkadish looked at his blade as if it were an animal that had followed him home. He lifted it. The conduits flared. He held it at his side, not raised. "You would turn the duel into a shaming," he said. "I would turn it into a reckoning," Mara said, "for both of us." There was laughter then from the balcony where the Martian envoy stood, brittle with fear, from the Kos Hill cluster with their crystal throats, and another voice, sharp as a scalpel. "He will carve her in half and that will be the end." "Perhaps," Mara said aloud, "or perhaps not." The ring widened, the station dimmed. Someone somewhere knew how to make a stage and could not resist the gravity of it. The fleets outside tightened their formations like muscles clenching. Verkadish took his place at one side of the ring. Mara stood at the other, empty-handed, the rod now tucked away because it had done its work, and now courage had to walk in on its own feet. "Begin," Verkadish said. "No," said a third voice. Every head pivoted. A breach alarm screamed in the docking bay. The stars outside flared with the heat signatures of incoming ships, unauthorized, fast, hot. The station's defense grid rolled up in a glittering net, too late to stop the first wave. The concourse shook underfoot. Panels leapt in their casements. The vultures had arrived. They were not a species, they were a practice. They followed fear and fed on it. Everywhere the oathless went, they came behind like scavengers, because terror made people slow and grief made them easy. They had watched the fleets gather and smelled a feast, and now they pecked at the edges of the assembly like crows at a battlefield. Their gunships were sharp angles and serum injections. Their pilots were adrenaline and a hunger to be last, the one to be blamed for anything. The ring dissolved into screaming. Security crews sprinted. Defensive turrets unfolded from the dome and spat coherent light. Against the curve of the observation glass, the vulture ships broke like thrown knives against a shield, but the second wave was bigger. Verkadish moved first. He did not look at Mara. He did not lower his blade. He spun toward the nearest docking gate, and the blade rose because some things are bone deep and do not need permission. The weapon sang as it cut through air. A vulture breacher round punched through the outer hatch. The pressure wave slammed into the concourse and unfurled all the banners at once. People went down like grass. Verkadish planted his feet and hewed the breacher in two. Sparks sprayed, white and blue. He reached into the hole and dragged a vulture boarder out by his harness and threw him into a wall so hard the wall dented. Mara did not run. She had not grown up in a place that allowed it. She sprinted to a static control panel, ripped the cover off with hands that had learned how to break what needed breaking, and popped the emergency relay. Gravity locked 15% more in the concourse, enough to keep bodies from sliding toward vacuum. She keyed her wrist mic. "Barlow, Sector 3 breach, I need a seal." "You should be dead," he snapped back. "Seal Wraith," he did. The segmented doors shuddered, then slid, then locked. Pressure steadied. The air burned with the tang of ozone and alarm. Verkadish slashed another breacher and stepped forward into a hail of flechettes that pinged off his armor like rain against a monument. He moved with a terrible, practiced grace. Every step landed as if it had always fallen there. Every blow was a sentence that had learned itself so well it no longer needed a reader. The vultures were too many. They dropped smoke. They dropped stun webs, beautiful, glittering drapes of charge that wrapped a man and put his muscles to sleep. They cut into the crowd with shock sticks and knives meant for silence. Human marines formed a hard angle around the ambassadors and pushed them toward the inner doors. The Koshil sang a keening note that shattered 3 stun webs at once. Their crystalline throats turned into weapons in a panic they had not anticipated, and the Oathless strode into the smoke and carved. Mara ran, not away. She ran straight for the smoke. She dove over a toppled kiosk and into the gray. A vulture turned toward her, eyes wide under a transparent mask, mouth pressed thin. He yanked his shock stick up too slow. Mara rolled under his arm, came up behind him, and jammed her memory probe straight into the base of his skull under the helmet's ridge. It was not designed for violence, but the surge of raw sensory data dumped into his cortex was like a storm. He stiffened and slumped. She caught his weight, shoved him off, and took his shock stick. The smoke ceiling glowed. A breacher charge on the observation glass flared into a quartz-blind glare. Cracks skittered. The station groaned, and then a shadow grew outside the dome like a mountain aching out of the sea. It was the Oathless Thorn, Verkadish's ship, shifting position. Mara felt the hairs on her arms lift. The ship's spine unfurled. Panels slid. A field emitter rose from the ship's dorsal hull. It was old. It was ugly. It was not on any registry. It licked light across the station's shield and sang a note so low it made bones complain. The breacher charge flared brighter, then died. The cracks in the glass stopped moving. Verkadish backed through the smoke and found Mara with a glance. He nodded once, a command without words, this way. No time for the duel. The galaxy had invaded. The rules had changed because death likes changing the rules when it suits it. They moved together, not partners, not yet, but adjacent in a line that cut across chaos. They cleared 1 hatch, 2 hatches. Mara kept her shock stick low because a high strike makes you feel strong and wastes energy. She stuck her probe into a second vulture because people do not learn after the first lesson if they are busy dying. Then she threw her stick to a human sergeant who had lost his. She keyed the seal on the 3rd hatch. The hatch blinked a rejection at her as if this were a philosophical debate. She popped the access panel with a stolen blade and crossed 2 wires. The door opened because doors prefer to cooperate with the brave. Behind them, the weight of battle rolled. Admiral Barlow's voice became iron. The Martian envoy stopped laughing and started shooting with precise bursts that spoke of training hidden politely behind poetry. The Koshil started singing names of mountains, which in their culture means we will not break here. Not in this place, not now. Your ship, Mara said, breath burning. You can project that field anywhere. Only once, Verkadish said, and only there. There is a way to turn their speed against them, Mara panted. They are riding their own wake. If we can pull them into the lattice seam outside the station's shadow, we can tangle their vector. A snarl, not a kill. Enough to scare them back. You know this because you live in a place where machines hum and the hum is your religion, Verkadish said almost gently. Because I don't like bullies, Mara said. He almost smiled again. They reached an access shaft. They climbed. The shaft rang with proximity alarms and the clatter of boots. The interstice hummed around them, the lattice of the station's shield doing work like a body knitting itself after a cut. Mara's shoulders were fire. Verkadish did not breathe hard. He climbed like gravity had insulted his mother. At the top of the shaft, a service room opened. The far wall was pure, curved glass, thick as memory. Outside, the black rolled and the vultures came on like a second night falling. Mara sprinted to the control cradle. Her fingers moved. The room lit with the star field overlay and the ghost of a lattice, delicate as a spider's art. She tapped a point where the shield's edge kissed the interstice seam. Here, she said, this is where the station breathes out. Your plan, Verkadish said. I will force a shield vent. They will see a gap. They will dive. You will time your ship's field to flex exactly when they hit. The vent will become a curl. Their wake will fold. They will spin themselves out. They will not die if they are good. If they are sloppy, they will crack themselves like eggs on the knife of gravity. Either way, they will leave. You are asking me to save your enemies, he said. I'm asking you to prove you don't need to kill to keep a corridor quiet. His eyes met hers. For a fraction of a second, she saw the person under the ritual, the man who had been given an oath in a time when every voice had demanded that someone hold the old story shaped like a blade. She did not look away. On your count, he said. Mara exhaled once, twice. She keys the vent protocol with an override code she had only seen once in a manual that had not expected to be remembered. The station shuddered. A bright gap blossomed in the shield, small and seductive as a mouth. The vultures swarmed toward it like swimmers toward a riptide they could not see. 3, Mara whispered. Verkadish's ship pivoted, field emitter aligning, a metal flower unfurling. 2. The vultures bit the gap. 1. The oathless thorn sang. The field curved like a cupped hand. The vent twisted under the influence, turned into a spiral that caught the ship's wakes, gathered them like ribbons, and snapped them in a loop. One by one, the vulture craft reeled like insects hitting a window. Some spun harmless and recovered, burning fuel with sudden panic at their backs. 2 were not good enough and did not anticipate the fold's edge. They hit it and shattered. Their debris lines slashed into deorbit by the station's gravity well, which had been quiet until it saw a chance to be helpful. The vultures broke. They were not faithful to anything except hunger, and this was the moment when hunger made them cowards. Their wave frayed. Their leaders reversed with a speed that was almost beautiful. The rest followed because fear is a contagion and it does not care what flag you thought you served. They fled like birds when a storm says go. The station exhaled. The defense grid curled in. The lattices smoothed. The alarm stepped down in tone like a choir descending. And in the service room, Mara's hands shook for the first time. Verkadish reached out his hand and set it on the control cradle next to hers, not touching, but close enough to ground the tremor. His armor hummed faintly with residual field. He looked out through the glass at his ship and then at the receding storm. You fight with light and air and nerves, he said. You have made a dance of mercy. Mercy isn't the absence of force, Mara said. It's the art of using the least force that works. A human saying, my own. He grunted, which might have been a laugh. They went back down. The concourse had been changed by chaos. This was always the way. Broken kiosks. Blood that would be patched with cleanser and a prayer whispered by someone who did not pray. People standing very still because when someone tries to kill you, you do not move for a minute even after they fail. Admiral Barlow met Mara halfway, a man who had been angry and then terrified and then proud and did not know what expression fit now. I should arrest you, he said. I should decorate you. I should yell until the air shakes. Later, Mara said. Verkadish came up behind her, blade still in his hand, not raised. Every weapon on the concourse twitched toward him and stayed, because nobody wanted to be the person who started another chaos. He stepped into the ring of light that still ghosted on the floor where someone had tried to make a stage for a duel and reality had objected. He lifted his blade an inch, then set it down on the deck for the second time that day. It seems, he said in a voice that carried like a bell through fog, that we have already fought. The packed ranks of watching species shifted. The Coshill gave a low chord. The Martian envoy lifted his chin in an angle that meant, for them, I accept this absurdity to see where it goes. Mara moved to stand opposite him, empty-handed. She looked at the blade. She looked at him. She looked at the people watching, their faces molded by fear that had not quite decided what to become now that it had not gotten its meal. You said we had a duel, she said. We did, said Verkadish. We altered its terms, we had witness, we had mercy, we had the taste of our own blood in our mouths and still did not bite. That is a duel any warrior can honor. Mara felt the breath she had been holding for hours slide out. That was when the old fear came back, thin as a paper cut and twice as sharp. Stop, called a voice from the balcony. This is theater. This is seduction. The oathless will leave and he will do this again somewhere else, and all you will have one is a song. It was the Piran delegate, burn-faced and bitter, whose planet had watched 3 of its outlying domes go dark when the oathless had answered a duel for a corridor 5 years ago. Their grief had curdled into a shape that could not keep still. Maybe, Mara said quietly. She turned so her profile was to Verkadish and her full face to the room. Or maybe we set a new law, not words, a shape of action. He came, he drew a circle, we stepped into it, but we decided what to do inside it. We chose witness. We chose to turn aside killing when killing would have been easy and praised. We made a story in front of all of you. You will tell that story. The vultures will tell that story to each other quietly, and it will alter them in ways they will not admit. People who are tired will find a breath. People who are brave will find a method. Maybe it is a song. Maybe a song is how empires begin to rot from arrogance and grow something else where the rot gives way. And me, Verkadish asked, what do I do with a life that has been an oath written on the inside of my skull? You lay your blade down, Mara said, or you learn to carry it differently. He looked at the blade. He lifted it, and for a heartbeat, the concourse held onto that sight as if it were the only star left in the sky. He turned the weapon so the conduits faced up, where the light could look into them. He pressed 2 places on the grip that had never been pressed together at the same time in 1,000 years of using that blade. The blue conduits flickered, went dim. The hum dropped into silence. The weapon became a piece of metal that remembered old wars and now had to learn new work. The silence that followed was not empty. It was like a field after harvest, already planning spring. Verkadish hauled the blade up with both hands and walked toward the human delegation. He set the blade on the deck at Admiral Barlow's feet, then stepped back. He made a motion that no one there had ever seen him make. He bowed, not deep, not theatrical, honest. I will not be the hand that keeps the corridors quiet anymore, he said. The binding is an old story, and old stories are a kind of disease when they are not allowed to die. Today, a human taught me to be something other than my oath. I cannot be the old shape. Perhaps I can be the bridge a different shape uses to cross. The Piran delegate made a broken sound. It might have been sorrow. It might have been the first clean breath since a dome had gone dark. Mara stepped forward because you do not leave a person alone when he has taken a blade out of his hand and set it down in front of the world. She stood beside him, not touching. Together they looked up through the glass at the oathless thorn sitting like a patient animal, at the fleets turning on their anonymous axes, at the vultures stringing their retreat across the dark like a confession. What now? Admiral Barlow asked raw. We go home, Mara said. We tell the story. And what should the council call this day in the registry? The Martian envoy asked almost to himself. The day we broke a circle, Mara said. The day we learned power is not only a blade. The day we chose to count the living as carefully as we count the dead. Too long, the envoy said and smiled very slightly. Then shorten it, Mara said. But let the long name live in your chest. Verkadish turned his head. He looked down at the thin scar on Mara's wrist where a fall had once taught her to reach farther next time. You have changed me, he said. This is dangerous work. So is living, Mara said. He nodded, placed his hand against his chest, and spoke in a language that sounded like dry earth drinking rain. Later, the linguists would say it was a name he had not spoken in centuries. He said it like a promise to himself. He turned and walked to his ship without his blade. The oathless thorn took him in and turned. It did not vanish in a storm of speed. It moved like a man walking into morning. It left the station's shadow and did not cloak. It took a straight path, and all the fleets around moved to make room, because sometimes you show respect out of fear, and sometimes you show it because respect is the right size and shape for what is in front of you. For a long time, no one said anything. The concourse felt like a place at the end of a long prayer that had not asked for anything and still gotten a gift. People started to move. People started to pick up debris and pass it to each other, this humble relay a way of saying we are not helpless. We can make order, we can make tea, we can climb stairs and scrub blood out of a floor, we can do tomorrow. Admiral Barlow came to stand next to Mara. He did not apologize. He did not praise. He looked at the place where the blade sat at his boots, and then to the door where an old warrior had walked out lighter by a weight so huge he might not yet feel the change. "You turned a duel into a lesson," he said. "I hope I turned it into a beginning," she said. "They will write songs about this," he said. "They will get details wrong," she said. He snorted, and because he was human and had been alive a long time, he reached out and wrapped one hand around her shoulder and squeezed once. It was an embrace any soldier would accept, brief, firm, honoring. "Go sleep," he said. "I will," she said. She did not. She walked the concourse and picked up pieces of broken things and set them right. She sat with a Coshill who had sung too hard and put her hand on their crystal throat until the vibration settled. She caught a vulture who had not escaped and was shaking so hard his teeth sounded like hail on a tin roof. And she put the memory probe in his palm and told him to hold it and feel the voices of people who had chosen to make room for him to live. And he cried very quietly and then went to the detention block without trying to make it a performance. Hours later, when the station lights shifted to the long blue of coming rest, Mara Solis found a corner where the observation glass met the spine. She sat. The stars hung where they always had, which is a kind of mercy we do not praise enough. She took the memory rod out and turned it between her fingers. It made no sound. It lit very faintly. She did not press it to her chest for old grief. She did not play the interstice voices again. She held it until her fingers warmed it and it felt like hers. The door behind her slid open. Admiral Barlow's boots approached and stopped. "He left a message," Barlow said. She said. "He asked that if we ever saw him take up a blade again, we send him this recording." The Admiral nodded at the memory rod. He said, "I prefer to drink salt when I crave a sweetness that will rot me. Your light will be my salt." Mara smiled without teeth. Salt keeps things honest. Barlow folded himself down to sit beside her with a soft grunt that admitted he was older than he used to be. They watched the dark. After a while, the Martian envoy came and sat too, and did not talk about poetry. The Coshill joined and hummed very low, a sound like wind in a canyon. People came in ones and twos and found a place on the floor, because in space you gather heat wherever it is offered. When sleep finally took Mara, it was not with a jerk. It was with a gentle conspiracy between her eyes and the universe to rest. In the morning, if you could call any segment of a wheel a morning, the council convened and resolutions were drawn and old pacts were written in a new hand. The interstice still breathed. The station's hull still hummed. The corridors were not quiet because of fear. They were quiet because people had decided to lower their voices and listen. The story moved out like light, slow, and unkillable. It moved from ship to ship, dock to dock, mouth to mouth. It reached a vulture nest and made a young pilot walk away and grow vegetables on a moon with a thin wind. It reached a Piran child who had lost a father and taught her that enemies can put down their weapons, and that this does not mean the lost are unremembered. It reached a far world's Colosseum and made the crowd go silent when someone raised a blade, and then lower that blade until it touched the sand and lay there like a question that had been answered too many times, and now wanted to be a different question. In time, the oathless thorn appeared where war was a rumor and left before it became a plan. In time, Verkadish stood in places where he had once made the ground thirsty and offered instead to teach the dance of mercy, and people who had hated him found their hate had nowhere to stand. Sometimes he failed because people like their old stories with their sharp edges, but sometimes he did not. Sometimes one failure is enough to make a century bearable. On a day months later, he returned to Concord Station without announcement. He walked into the concourse where he had laid down his blade and found Mara Salas sitting exactly where she had been, because they always knew where to find each other now. He bowed. She stood. They walked out to the glass and looked at the black. They did not talk about oaths. They talked about the hum of machines, the language of gravity, the way a corridor can carry more than ships. They talked about salt. And when they parted, it was not like a duel. It was like travelers parting after a long road, knowing there would be another road, another turn, another place where standing beside someone changes the temperature of a day. Engines roared through the black void. Docking clamps clicked like closing jackets. Flags moved in air made by machines and prayer and breath. The ancient warrior walked into the world without his blade, and a human walked beside him made of light and nerves and stubborn tenderness, and whole fleets changed their formation to make room for a story that had grown too large to ignore. The galaxy would remember it not as the day a monster was slain, not as the day a law was upheld. It would remember it as the day someone set a weapon down and still won. The day a human, small, unarmed, audacious, looked at an old story and said quietly, "Let's tell it better." And that day the galaxy learned. Humanity doesn't conquer, it endures, and in enduring, it teaches the stars how to listen.